Hey, good evening. Restart that, please. Can you restart that? No. All right. Well, take two. Good evening, Galleon. This is Mayor Tom O'Leary trying to introduce myself too quickly. Uh, Happy to have you here tonight, and want to touch base on really the activities this week that I see in city government. To start off with, this is committee week. And so Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday there'll be committee meetings, and there'll be Zoom meetings, so anyone who is interested can tune in. For certain, tomorrow night's meeting, the agenda's been set, and that will involve at least 4 items that are on the agenda. Probably the largest item for consideration, and the one that may have the biggest impact, is a request to make some changes within a zoning district, R1D, which is in an area that's kind of a manufactured home zoning, if you will. But really, the area that we're talking about involves the former Wesley Chapel and almost adjoining, but not quite adjoining residence on that lot. So my expectation is that we'll have that conversation, make sure that works with council's vision of what they want to do with that land, and is consistent. There was a little bit of a discussion, there was a discussion at the Planning Commission, and initially some moving forward on this that would have, in the view of our legal counsel, result in what might be considered spot zoning. So without getting into the technicalities, if you will, we hope to be able to correct that, and what that will do will allow for the sale of the former Wesley Chapel and be put into a use which is largely repair and some fabrication of jewelry, and as many as 20 or so jobs. And this would be a relocation, so we're kind of excited about that, and we're really in the process of making the changes in a way that can ultimately get that new business in town and allow the local church to move fully into the building that they acquired at Atwood in South Market. So that's one item. The other items on the agenda tomorrow night really involve sort of a couple of them are repeats, and they've been discussed for a while, and those would be trees and sidewalks. I believe that we've come up with a relatively good fix on the trees, and that really has to do with allocating funds out of next year's budget. And so I'll have a discussion about that, and so those are 3 out of the 4. I was just taking a look at it. I can't, I'm embarrassed to say, I can't off the top of my head recall what the 4th item on the agenda is. Really, the biggest consequence is what will likely take place on Wednesday night, and that's a discussion about possible sewer rate increases. Myself and the service director have been looking at the water rate increases, and just as a reminder, water rates are set by the statute by the city service director, while sewer rates are set by city council. So we've been moving along step by step, looking at the fact that neither the water rates or the sewer rates are collecting enough money to cover our costs. And so what you've seen over the last, frankly, several years is a drawing down of the fund balances in those 2 funds. Really believe it's got to a point where we need to stabilize those funds where they currently are, and then over a 3 or 4 year period begin to have those funds get to a break-even point, and then begin to, if you will, recharge those fund balances. So that conversation will start on Wednesday with the presentation from a rate consultant that council hired to look at making recommendations on what to do with sewer rates. Just one or two quick points on that. One of the key factors about how much sewer rates will be adjusted has to do with going into projected future capital spending and seeing what items that have been looked at and requested will actually need to be committed and funded. And so there'll be a discussion about, if you will, trimming some of the capital improvements requests on one hand, and then looking at ways to raise the money so the necessary improvements get done. Everything I just said about the sewer rates is true of the water rates. There are needs for some improvements that I've mentioned before in our reservoir system, and as our new superintendent at the water plant begins to get more familiar with the plant on Railroad Street, I'm sure there'll be some identifying of capital projects. So I guess the long and the short of that is that beginning on Wednesday will be an initial discussion and presentation, and then my hope is that whatever increases are deemed necessary, that gets those decisions get made and that they can become effective likely with the beginning of the new year, 2021. So there's your New Year's present probably from city government, is some sort of adjustment, which will likely be the beginning of rate adjustments that we'll need to make over the next several years. So the best way to make a judgment about whether or not these rates are necessary or and evil, or a necessary evil, or just evil, is to tune in on Wednesday night and get to listen in on the introductory proposal made by the rate consultant. Thursday night is streets and alleys. We hope to be able to tell that committee by Thursday, and it's a little bit short notice, but of the projects that we have under contract for our local paving, kind of the sequence of when that will happen. What is likely to happen for certain is that those identified segments of our local road system will be milled off beginning early next week, Monday or Tuesday of next week, and then the paving of those streets or resurfacing of those streets will follow soon after that. And what we're going to try to do is give those people along the streets something, a bit of notice, particularly where we have on-street parking that might get in the way. Grant is a street that comes to mind now for some reason, where I know there's a lot of on-street parking, and we'll have to make sure that we're out there with no parking notifications so that people can find an alternative place to park, whether it's on Liberty or behind the house or somewhere, so that milling first off, and then the resurfacing will probably take those each one of those streets out of commission for part of or most of one day. So beyond that, what I would see happening on Thursday is we're getting real close to locking in the sources of funding that we'll need next year for the winding of Portland Way. And so in addition to talking about where those dollars are going to come from, we'll spend a bit of time talking about any real estate issues that need to be managed, some of the acquisition, make sure that is all done in advance of January, when we need to get that final right-of-way plan to ODOT. And pretty soon in that project we'll be at a point, it reminds me a little bit of going into a turnpike. You get to a point where there's no more exits, and you have to get in line and get ready to pay your dues, and we're getting very close to that. I have every reason to believe that we'll begin that reconstruction, that widening and reconstruction on schedule in July, August, maybe September, about a year from now. And the bulk of that project, as I mentioned before, but we'll kind of repeat, will be in 2022. That's when I think people will see the biggest conflict. The need to have traffic in each direction, I think, will prove its worth in 22. But in 21, some of the work really will look like getting ready for the big project the next year. And it'll look that way because that's exactly what the contractor will be doing. So anyways, that's Thursday night, streets and alleys, and whatever else the committee gets to the clerk. So that's really, as far as the council agenda, that's really the big items this week. I'm interested to see if there are any questions or reactions to the outline that I gave a week ago about use of the COVID funds. If they're not, I just offer up that it looks, from my perspective here in the mayor's office, that will likely focus in on utility rebates to the maximum number of residential customers that we can qualify. And I'll just take another second and say that's probably going to be the need to have some small account balance due. What's that called? Late balance. But in any case, and then we would be able to credit, as far as the CARES Act rules and the state legislation, you really need to be able to show an impact for the city to pass those dollars back to our customer for a credit. And so, if that turns out to be something council's serious in, wanting to put a lot of the $560,000-$70,000 into utilities, then we'll try to provide details. There are a number of accounts that run a little bit with a past due balance. Many have never done that, and we'll talk a little bit about how that might be in your interest to have a bit of a past due balance, and then we can credit that. Another item that seems to be, if you will, a front runner in the discussion is some type of business, some very small business grant. Anyone's guess as to whether Congress will get around to additional help for business, but from what I can sense and talking with and observing the local business community, there are many businesses that could use an additional boost, if you will, and clearly grants to businesses are an eligible activity under the federal state rules that localities were given. So, all right, I'll stop there. If there's not a whole lot of interest in that, you can see we're finishing up some park projects, and the more time I spend as we wind up the fair weather seasons, the more projects I can see lining up for freeze funds for 2021. So, we have our eyes on some improvements. There was the initial pickleball courts in. I'm not a player. I haven't caught anyone down there playing it yet, but that's down there. We'll kind of see how use goes and feedback from the people who do play pickleball with some regularity, and try to improve that, just as one of the examples of taking something we put in place this fall, but really think next year we can make it a place where the people who are enjoying that game have a high quality place to recreate. So, I think I'll stop with that and see if we have any questions.
Yes, the first question I've got tonight is actually same question from two different people.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn and Angela would like an update on a grocery store.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot, ladies. I would say that our plan remains the same. In that we would try to encourage a small independent grocery store to come to town. And what I've said the last couple of weeks, a developer that works a lot in Galion, building projects here, we've had initial conversation, and they're working with Save a Lot, and they're, from what I understand, at least early on, some discussions about remodeling, modernizing the Save a Lot. So that's really what I have now, the ongoing pursuit of an independent to come to town. And again, like I said a couple of weeks ago, I've got some initial hopes that Save a Lot will invest and modernize here in Galion. What's really, it's a pretty active store. I talked to someone just this afternoon who said they went there for milk and there wasn't any. So I think that kind of happens out there, that their milk, because they price it so well or whatever. So anyways, there's customers out there. I think as one of the people mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the internet, one of the people who I know watches this, saying, they found all kinds of stuff out at Save a Lot. So that's what I'd say to those two. The efforts towards acquiring a site that the city might control to clear and to develop this sort of independent grocery, we can continue to work on that, but it's quite honestly a slow process. So that's all I've got. It's kind of a long BS answer. I'll be the first one to rush to the microphone if we can make some of this happen. I saw, I guess maybe it was on the Inquirer comment sheet, somebody was, or comment section, somebody was cracking on me, calling me Tommy Boy. Thought it was kind of funny, but suggested that I somehow said it would be easy to get a grocery store to town. So I'm not sure where anybody got that impression. It's going to be difficult, but we're still working at it.
Okay, thanks, Mayor.
Yep.
The only other question I have as of right now comes from Sierra, and I asked her to clarify. She just said sidewalks, so I don't know if maybe you want to start by kind of previewing what the committee is going to talk about tomorrow, and maybe she'll clarify.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what they're going to talk about, except the what I believe they're going to talk about are sidewalks that are heaved up and almost to a certain extent unpassable, that are next to or real close to some of those large trees. So you tear down the tree, is the city then going to be responsible for the sidewalk? So I know that part of all the repair that might be needed to be done with our sidewalks, I think that's probably where that will start, Sierra. I hesitate to mention it, but there are some federal funds that are administered by the state that are about neighborhood development, and walkable communities are an allowable use and perhaps a possible use in town. That'd require a lot of planning insofar as where you would start logically, what neighborhoods you'd try to connect, and how you'd go about if the point of the question is this isn't a very walkable community, I'd say, yeah, you're right. If we want to transform that, we have to take a careful look at where we have sidewalks and match that up with potential funding. I don't think we'll go very far at all going down the route that was tried 25 or 20 some years ago, where they used a set, where they went out and threatened may not be the correct word, but if you got your sidewalk painted on and were told to repair it or else, it seemed kind of threatening. I don't think that will get us where we want, which would basically identify a substandard sidewalk. If the owner didn't fix it, then the city would come in and fix it and then attach those costs with an extra almost penalty onto the person's taxes. It might work for a while, but it's a good way to stir up a lot of frustration and potential hostility. And frankly, one of the things that we've been kind of or pretty successful about over the last 7 years is making progress without having to, stir up that proverbial hornet's nest in the process. So when it comes to sidewalks here, I would want to approach it carefully, and that's really all I got. That's really all I have on that.
Okay, and Sierra just said thank you, so that must have addressed her question.
Yeah.
And that is all I had for tonight, unless anybody else sends anything in right now.
Okay. What I'll do to close is to reinforce, if you have some time in and around 7 o'clock on Wednesday, get the Zoom address, and I don't know, we live stream that as well.
Yes, we do.
So if you can watch this, then you can watch that on Wednesday, and I expect there to be some pushback, outcry, if you will, about the notion of raising water and sewer rates. Gee, I understand that. It was a previous council and myself that lowered those water and sewer rates. Think back in 2014. Is that when it was? 14, I think, Matt?
Yes, 2014.
2014. So yeah, it's 6-7 years ago. They were lowered by about 1/3 on the sewer side 6 years ago. If I were to be a critic of myself, which anybody who knows me, that is how it is, I would be a little bit critical of not looking at adjusting those rates a little bit sooner. But I think what was done back in 14 was wise, and it's lowered rates by about 1/3 for the last 6 years now. Critics or cynics will say, well, now it's time to pay the piper, and maybe that's true, but what also is true is that your rates have been, over the last 6 years, quite a bit lower than they had been previously. Water, it's just about the same story. If you go back in 14, what we did in particular was lower low volume users, places, residences that had 2s or 3s, or 3s or 4s in their usage, and we lowered those rates pretty significantly. Large water customers didn't see as large of a decrease, but the smaller folks did. So, there again, I think what we did was the right idea. Now we're going to have to work through the process of bumping those rates and getting a consensus, I think, in the community, so that council feels like this is something that needs to be done, and that we don't get into a confrontational kind of showdown over whether the rate should be increased X or X plus this or X minus that. So Wednesday point of all that is the Wednesday begins the discussion of how to set those rates, and so participate, tune in, and then get back with council.
Thank you, Mayor. I did
Yeah.
have a question come in late from Kimberly. Again, going back to the grocery store topic,
Yeah.
what about the former Geyers area in the Guy West Plaza?
I think from my perspective, from the city's perspective, we've not been much contact with the landlord. I would say that we've made clear what we would do in terms of trying to provide some relief, and it's that, quite honestly, Kimberly has gone kind of quiet, but you certainly wouldn't rule it out. Maybe I was naive first when Geyers first shut down, that I thought there would be an operator and the landlord would be able to put things together. That's not happened, and it's been kind of quiet on that front. So that's why without answering her question, I tried to say, Drug Mart will look at maybe expanding. That has something to do with whether or not there's a liquor agency permit available in Galion. And the other thing that we know for sure is there's the beginning discussion. I don't know for sure, that's not how to say it. We're really beginning to see signs that Save-A-Lot may modernize that store. So it's the best I've got. We are trying to acquire some property that the city and or the port could then begin a discussion with an independent operator. And the financing of the store, how you would do that's pretty well understood. We don't have a site that candidly would be low enough cost to be able to make that happen. So we're really working on that part of it. But I do believe we could put together the financing if we can get the other two pieces in place. I hope that's, Kimberly, that's probably, if you're left with that answer, and I'll maybe close on this, as dissatisfied with it as, it felt like, or it seems like as I'm uttering it or saying it, I'm not happy with where we are, but that's, I think, a good summary of where we're at. And I don't, I'll eat my hat if something happens at Geyers, and we'll certainly support it, but I'm not spending a lot of time trying to make that situation happen in the short term. It's kind of up to the landlord to make that happen. All right, that's what I got. Nothing much going on. We're I think council meeting will be next week. We'll have more to talk about then. And I would say that finance-wise, if you have any input on what we should do with those COVID dollars, call your council member or call up here and sort of cast your opinion or any recommendations. It's a lot of money, and we want to make sure two things happen. One, we get it to the maximum number of residences, particularly those with utility, been challenged to pay the utility bills. And two, that there is some money, as kind of a second small transfusion for the local business community. So if there are better additional suggestions, let's get that discussion going, because we'll have to be making a decision. One of the things that's real important is to remember these dollars have to be spent by the end of this year. So that's really channeled our thinking in terms of setting up any program or trying to fine-tune the distribution of these funds. We've got to make sure that we get something in place and are in a position to get those dollars out, as many of them as possible. Sound like a real politician there tonight, Gallion. I want to spend those dollars as fast as we can, but I say that with tongue in cheek and trying to get those into people's hands, utility customers, and to as many of our local businesses as possible. So with that, and not buying any more time, and knowing we're competing with other stuff, I'll sign off and thank everybody again for tuning in, asking the questions, and we'll be back next week. Good night.